Hear, hear.
Gareth Thomas.
It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Gentleman for North Warwickshire, and I join him in praise for teachers not only in his constituency and in mine, but also across the country, and also praise for head teachers, the enormous contribution to the future of our country that they make. I suppose what I would say to the Honourable Gentleman is that given that so many areas of our country are finding it difficult to recruit and retain teachers, and many schools are finding it difficult to get a good head teacher at on the first recruitment exercise, he may well want to reflect on whether his party's policies have had quite the positive impact that he claims. I wanted, if I may though, Madam Deputy Speaker, to go back to the Chair of the Education Select Committee's opening remarks and to praise his request for the message from this debate to be that we want investment in textbooks, not tanks, and a 10-year plan for education. Because it certainly does feel that education is the public service that is not getting sufficient attention around the Cabinet table in the negotiations with the Treasury. He was too polite to say so, but perhaps I can say so. It is a pity that the Secretary of State for Education is not here to hear in person the call for a 10-year plan for education. And what I'm sure he would not want to say at this stage is what my honourable friend for Sheffield Brightside quite rightly said, is that there needs to be more support and investment and pride in the contribution that comprehensive schools make to our country, and more praise for the effort of local councils to support high attainment and good standards in our schools. The idea that councils and local education authorities were ever a dead hand hindering high standards was always a nonsense, and it is particularly a nonsense at the moment, given the huge cuts in funding to local authorities that LEAs are having to deal with. I wanted to make the rest of my remarks unashamedly parochial. I am fortunate to represent an area in terms of the London Borough of Harrow that has been deemed by the Education Policy Institute as offering the best education in terms of the increase in standards when a child enters school to when they leave school. And whilst all the head teachers and teachers in Harrow have been delighted with the accolade that the EPI gave them, none of them would say that they have sufficient resources. I have schools that work extremely closely together. They pride themselves, the head teachers, on their cooperation and collaborative spirit. It is led in particular by the high schools, and in my constituency, Whitmore High School, Noah Hill High, Harrow High and Rooksheath heads work particularly closely together. All have very strong academic reputations. And I'd want in particular to single out the heads of Rooksheath and Whitmore High School. The head of Rooksheath was named not so long ago as the London Head Teacher of the Year, and at Whitmore High School, the head teacher there has a particularly strong, good reputation for leading the school in the way that she has done through a period of refurbishment and redevelopment. But other schools just outside my constituency, not quite as well politically represented as the four I've already named, Bentley Wood, Park, Cannons, Salvatorian and Sacred Heart, again, all have strong reputations, all have effective leadership, and all show good academic performance. But all are crying out for more investment in funding. They have noted, as the heads of primary schools in my constituency have, that they are having to cope with an increase in employers' contributions to non-teaching pensions. They're having to cope with teachers' pay awards not being fully funded, similarly non-teaching pay awards not being fully funded, the apprenticeship levy. Those pressures are amounting to an extra £54,000 in costs per primary school in Harrow on an average, and an extra £159,000 on average per secondary school in Harrow. Similarly, schools in Harrow are having to cope with reductions in income from the way in which the minimum funding guarantee works and from reductions in their pupil premium grant. On average, primary schools are losing income £37,000 a year per primary school in 2017-18, £79,000 for every secondary school last year. That's an average overall in terms of school funding additional pressures facing every head teacher and governing body of almost I'll give way in just a second, of almost £100,000 per primary school in Harrow last year, £238,000 per secondary school in Harrow, and that urgently needs to be addressed. I give way to the Minister.
I'm listening very carefully to the points the honourable member for Harrow West is making, but he should be aware that no school in his constituency will lose funding. In fact, they will gain funding under the national funding formula once we reach the end point of 2.4%.
Well, I just gently say to the honourable gentleman, and he's very welcome to come to Harrow, and I'd be very happy to organise a round table for him with head teachers of both primary schools and secondary schools, because the experience that he describes is not the experience that they are having to face on a daily basis in managing the funding needs, their funding needs. The honourable gentleman is sat next to a colleague of his who I was glad to meet to discuss the particular funding needs of a sixth form college, which faces significant additional financial pressures going forward. I end on this point. There does need to be more funding put into the school's education system. Harrow needs it, and every other school needs it. Much as I'd be delighted to invite the honourable gentleman to join the Minister for Education in visiting Harrow, I hope, in the light of what the Deputy Speaker has said, he'll forgive me for not allowing him to intervene at this point. But finally, I just say, I do think there needs to be a 10-year funding plan, and crucially, more investment next year in funding for schools across England, and particularly, if the House will forgive me, in Harrow.